Real questions, real answers for real life. Come on in and pull up a chair. You're at 1850 Main Street with Michael Del Giorno and David Zanotti.
Last time we met, we left off reading a letter from Union soldier J.B. Buckbee to Confederate soldier P.J. Johnson. What can that letter teach us?
So it's fascinating to me that these two men who were clearly in battle against one another, one captured the other, in the quiet moments of pain and agony, they took care of each other. Mm. They treated each other with respect. Mm-hmm. And then they were separated. The war ended. One escaped a prison camp. The other went on to survive the battle. They both survived the war and then went looking for each other based upon a spirit of kindness. The Confederate general publishing a letter in the Detroit Free Press saying, if anyone knows, is Buckbee still out there?
Yeah.
Let me know because I'd like to talk with him. And I've got something that belongs to him. I've got his sword. Huh. Well, it took a while, but they connected, and Buckbee wrote back and said, keep the sword. Yeah. You won it in a fair fight. And it is remarkable to see how quickly these men who were mortal enemies within their lifetimes came back to the idea that not only are we both Americans, but our hope would be that if America was ever challenged, we know that our sons would stand side by side to defend our country. That's an amazing letter. Now, and it's not a religious letter, so we don't have any intimation of there being some profound spiritual conversion or anything like that. I mean, it's something changed in these guys. I'm not saying it might not have been religious, or they may have been religious men to start, but there's something that we don't catch much of, and I want to call it the word regret, because my study of the Civil War shows that the people who survived more than anything else regretted that it happened. All of them.
All of them did, yes.
Victors and vanquished. Is that what your studies have shown?
Yes. Of course, you've always got some bad people who did bear a grudge. Some Confederate officers fled the country, went to Mexico, went to Egypt, went somewhere else, said, I'm not going to live under that flag of the United States. You had some Union officers who they would, quote, show the bloody shirt. They would talk about how the South killed off all of these brave Union soldiers and so forth. But for the most part, most people went on with their lives and did not bear a grudge. And when Confederate memorials went up across the South in the late 1800s, Union officers and other citizens of the North helped pay for it.
So the concept of regret is the one that I think this continues to speak the most to me. And I think that's why it applies to this conversation we're having in 1850, because there are people today who really talk callously and flippantly about culture wars and civil war. And I just don't know if they've ever looked down that tunnel of history, gotten their feet on the ground, and recognized what they're talking about. I mean, this is the worst case scenario that you could possibly imagine, to bring people to a place where they would be willing to tear their country apart and kill each other.
Why do you want to do that?
In the process.
Why do you want to do that? You know, once it's on, it's on. You can't go home that day. You can't go to the grocery store. You can't take in a movie. You can't go on a bike ride. If it's on, and it's on until the last shot is fired, and God only knows when that's going to be. You don't want to go there.
So I think this letter is a wonderful testimony of the character of people chastened by war. Now, of course, we didn't know these two gentlemen before, and you have to study a lot of that period of history to understand what would persuade people to actually pick up arms and go, and what would persuade them to do the most amazing things of human sacrifice you can imagine, personal sacrifice in the cause that they believed in. I mean, the stories of people like Joshua Chamberlain and others are remarkable. But the point of it all is that there is one universal sentiment that comes out after the war, and that's the overwhelming sense of regret and the recognition that America is so much bigger than what we reduced it to
Right.
by going to war.
Yeah. Everybody was, after it was all over and the smoke cleared, it's like, why did we do this?
Yeah.
Well, okay, you had a good outcome. 3 million formerly enslaved people were now free. That's good. Couldn't we have done this a better way?
Well, but the thing is the war didn't free the slaves. It was the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment to
True.
the Constitution that freed the slaves.
True.
We could have passed that without a war.
Yeah. We could have done this without a high body count.
Yeah, and I guess that's the point. We could have done this without that. Now, some people say, well, no, human nature being what it is, it took that kind of, well, look, okay, think about that. That's horrible.
The Brits did it.
Yeah, exactly.
The Brits did it. The
The
French
British
did
were
it.
able to do it without a civil war.
The Spanish
Exactly.
did it. I mean,
Right.
come on.
And I know all of the socioeconomic arguments. You and I both studied this a lot. We understand there was a lot of reasons behind the Civil War that piled up on top of each other.
Yes.
The one that's the easiest to see is slavery,
Right.
and the one that is, without a doubt, the most significant was slavery. There's no diminishment of that whatsoever.
Correct.
But it wasn't just slavery that brought this
Right.
into the reality. And even afterwards, if you think about it, this is, I think, a very important realization. It wasn't that the war solved the problem. The problem was solved through the passing of the amendments. That could have happened had people been smart enough to understand, to do the right thing, to do the right thing the right way. And that's so. Well, I think this letter is powerful because it's real.
Thanks for stopping by at 1850 Main Street. We're glad you're here. Do you want to learn more about what is really going on behind the scenes in public policy? Tune in to the Public Square on over 200 radio stations coast to coast. Or download the free Public Square mobile app from your app store. Just look for the lamppost. Find out what America is really talking about at thepublicsquare.com.
Okay, Jeff, here's a question that I've got, and this is, man, this one has got me in trouble a lot of places. You and I have got some pretty long years in study, credentialed study, if you will, but we didn't just study when we were in school. I don't know that I've ever known you ever to not be in the midst of some project of study and reading a book, and you've never seen me without a book. And,
I know. Yeah.
You and I have had the privilege of traveling places, and we both get lost in the same spots. I mean, you and I went to the Lee Mansion.
Oh, yeah. That was a great time, wasn't it? Arlington.
At Arlington.
Yeah, the Arlington
Yes.
House.
And it was an extraordinary time walking through there and talking together. And we've been to a number of places together, sites of American history. Here's a question that gets me in trouble a lot. When I look at the 10 years preceding the Civil War in the United States of America, it's like I read these books and I keep looking for someone to show up and they don't show up. So I'll read the books, I'll watch the movies, I'll listen to I'll go through the documentaries, and I'm always looking for someone to show up who never shows up.
Who, Jesus?
Well, in a way,
I'm being serious. That sounds funny, but I'm actually being serious.
In a way, that's exactly what I'm saying. What I'm looking for is where were genuine Christian leaders looking down this tunnel and saying, wait a minute.
Seriously.
We can't possibly do this through war. We can't fix this problem through war. Now, we certainly see Christian leadership on the side of the abolition movement.
Yes.
And that came right from the tradition of Wilberforce and in England.
Yes.
And it's not that everyone who was an abolitionist was some highly virtuous, moral, God-fearing, church-going, communion-taking Christian.
Mm-hmm.
There were a lot of people of moral persuasion who weren't necessarily religious who were a part of the abolition movement. But my question is, why didn't the churches have the capacity, both North and South, to say, we're not sending our children into this war. We're not going to go to war. We're going to solve this problem however long it takes, and we're going to solve this problem without war. I can't find the church. I cannot find the advocacy for resolving this the right way. Now, I'm sure that if I can get deeper in the study, I'm sure there were people there doing it, but they never rose to the top to be able to make an impact. So in your studies, where were the Christians?
They were insulated from one another. You had true Bible-believing Christians in the South. You had true Bible-believing Christians in the North. You had, I would say also, in addition to them, you would have very devout, sincere people from other faiths who shared many of the same convictions that we share. Okay, I'll just leave it at that. But why didn't they ever get together? Why didn't the Christians from the North and the South have a prayer meeting in, let's say, southern Indiana? It's nice there. Let's go there, have a big brush arbor in southern Indiana. Right across the river is Ohio. We'll do, right across the river is Kentucky. We'll do one in Kentucky. We'll do one in Indiana. Let's do that. That sounds like fun. And get together, and when you're praying with people, when you're from Georgia and you realize the guy you're praying with is from New York, and he's just praying the stars down and he's loving Jesus and he's agreeing with you, how can you shoot him? How can you hate him? Maybe there's some kind of agreement we can come together and say, all right, we're gonna solve this issue, we're gonna solve that issue. I'll give a little, you give a little. Eventually, we'll take care of the problem. It may take us 10 or 15 years, but let's work on that. Yeah, D.L. Moody was very, very active in Chicago in the 1850s. He was later a chaplain in the Union Army, a staunch Union man. Good for him. And Lee's chief of artillery was his chaplain. Was an ordained Anglican pastor. Leonidas Polk was an Episcopalian bishop in the South and later became a Confederate general. He was killed in action in 1864. But and you have Oliver O. Howard, who was a Union general who passed out gospel tracts wherever he went. And he later founded Howard University for former slaves. Why couldn't these guys find each other, write each other, and say, hey, look, we really don't want to skewer one another in battle. We've already been in battle before in the Mexican War. We know what it's like. Why don't we get together? I can't find it anywhere, Dave. I don't know why were people so hard-headed and hard-hearted. Sometimes as Christians, we're so hung up on our own Christian buzzwords inside our own denominations, and we're so intent on the new parking lot and the new youth program, we don't see the horror that's about to descend on us coming from another direction.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or we see it's coming and we're too gutless to say anything about it and say, hey, folks, this Sunday we've got to address this problem that's going on in our country right now, or we're going to be slaughtering one another in the streets of Cleveland and Miami and St. Louis and Los Angeles and everywhere in between. But I don't hear it. We're too intent on the church program.
So this is, look, we brought this conversation together, and you and I have been talking about this for years. It's haunting. It's absolutely haunting. To read the Civil War and look for the church and look for the church and look for the church, look for people of faith, look for Christians and Jews coming together of all people, looking for that community of faith together to say, we've got to be able to find a way to deal with this. And you go and you read the editorials, you read the newspaper articles, you read the journals, you read all of this, and the polarization and the isolationism and the us versus them and the gray versus blue, it accelerates and accelerates and accelerates. Now, I know there were questions that were well beyond the question of slavery, but I will tell you, if the church had been involved in resolving the question of slavery, I don't believe the Civil War would have happened.
I agree.
I think we would have had a lot of other fights and a lot of other political fights, but I just can't. So my question is, what are the parallels today? Now, I'm not going to pick on one single issue because I've learned the hard way that, first off, in study, there is no moral equivalency on the question of slavery. I know that, but I know also politically in America that as soon as you talk about slavery, you're in big trouble, okay? I'm not afraid of the trouble. All right? That part doesn't bother me to have an honest conversation. But what I'm saying is, before we get to, is there a singular issue? No, there probably isn't a singular issue today, perhaps. Though many people would say the abortion issue might be that issue. I think that's a valid point of conversation. But it can also happen based upon the accumulation of issues. If what we have is a perpetual polarization, which you talked about earlier, which is that Christian people refuse to talk to each other, and they refuse to talk about these issues in the context of the lordship of Christ over all of our lives and the commandments of Christ on how we are to treat one another that prevail over everything else. And to see America isolated in the silos that we're in today is frightening. And it's not geographical. It's not north-south. It's not east-west. It's racial. That's a part of it. But is it really racial? It's philosophical. We could scatter this. It's like looking through a kaleidoscope. There's so many pieces of broken glass. It's almost doesn't, there's no boundaries. But what we don't see are people saying, how do we bring this to the throne of grace? How do we bring this to the merciful God, the Creator, upon whom we call upon to start our nation? How do we call upon God to save us before we destroy ourselves? So I'm just going to ask you, you've been at this a long time. You're not a pessimist. I know you. I've known you forever.
Oh, never.
We've known each other. We
Never
both
pessimist.
have great hope in the God of the Bible and in him holding the future in his hands. And this isn't a trite little, I've read the end of the book type statement. It goes much beyond that.
I don't like platitudes and cliches anyway.
Yeah, it goes much beyond that. Do you think we still have a shot of coming together?
Let me give you a couple of reasons why. So number one, I travel my state every month, almost every month. I travel quite a bit, and because of my day job, which talk about that some other time. I go into factories, I go to farms, I go to retail stores, I go to all kinds of businesses. You would not believe all the kinds of unusual places where I go. And I meet everybody from every race, every different religion, every socioeconomic strata. And when I tell them who I am and what I do and what we do, my team and so forth, everybody basically comes unglued, being happy to see us. Oh, really? You're here for that? Oh, really? You do? Oh, wow. Yeah. And it's a spiritual thing. Yeah. So I'm a chaplain. I'll tell you that. I'm a chaplain, and I'm in charge of a bunch of chaplains. And we go into very busy distribution centers and factories where they're making stuff. Yes, they still make stuff in America. And some people are different color of skin than I am. Other people are very wealthy. Other people are very poor. Some people are Muslims and some are atheists and so forth. I tell them what we do. And they go, oh, I'm so glad you're here. Can you go visit my mother in the hospital? Well, sure, I can. Let's go. Give me your name and we'll go visit her. Tell her I'll be there today, but I can't be there right now. Sure, we'll take care of that. I find people of goodwill wherever I go. And I believe that they are in the majority. I do not believe they are in the minority. I believe that is the vast amount of people in America. I would also say this. Here's something that I would like for people to do, please. Turn off the panic-driven network news.
Yeah.
The people who are upset who come to me, who are all perpetually upset and anxious, come and say, did you see that in the news? I said, what are you watching? CNN, Fox, MSNBC. I said, stop watching that stuff. You are playing into their hands. You are generating them revenue by watching this stuff. Turn it off. You're going to be a happier person. I believe that if we did a couple of things like that, if we started listening to each other, smiling more often, praying with one another, trying to uplift one another, we would help. We wouldn't solve all the problems. We would help diffuse a lot of problems that are percolating and boiling right now, and stop using charged language and stop insulting people. I think we would go far.
I don't think it does any good for pastors to hide. I don't think it does any good for pastors to say, we're not going to talk about anything that the Bible teaches
Amen.
about politics or public policy or history, because we don't want to be controversial. We want people to like us. And if people don't like us, they won't come into true faith. And then it'll be our fault. All right,
Stop preaching safe stuff.
Yeah, that is such the antithesis of the person of the revelation of the Bible. That is so totally out of touch, but it's dominant among many. But we can't count on pastoral leadership. The reason we can't count on pastoral leadership is it wasn't there in the Civil War. It wasn't there before the Civil War.
Absolutely right.
And if you don't see it there again, you can't just sit back and lament it. We have to do things like what you're doing, which is to go into the marketplace and into relationships and into local schools and into libraries and wherever we have the opportunity to live a biblical pattern of life and to encourage people to understand that we don't want to be at war with each other. This is not a smart idea.
Did you know there was a prayer revival in New York City in 1858?
In 1858.
There was a great revival in New York City in the late 1850s. And if I'm not badly mistaken, it was around 1858. Oh, churches all over the place praying up a storm. And God bless them, and that's wonderful. It didn't stop the Civil War. What if that had spread, though? What if those people from New York City, those praying Christians, had gone down to Richmond and gone down to Charleston, South Carolina, and said, hey, let's all get together and pray? I'm grateful that it happened there. What if it had spread, though, and become contagious? You know, we're going to have a National Day of Prayer soon. Well, why do we have to have it just one day out of the year? Why don't we do it every Thursday? And no one's stopping you at the factory. No one's stopping you at the distribution center or at the retail store or at the farm or wherever you are working, at the lawyer's office, wherever you are. No one's stopping you from, on your break, having your own prayer meeting. People say, well, what are you doing? I'm praying for America. You want to join me? Well, maybe I don't believe the same thing you do. Well, you want to pray for America? Yeah. All right, let's pray for America. You think God will hear us? I bet he will.
All this conversation started based upon an article you sent me, and I'm very grateful. A Union soldier sending a letter to a Confederate captain. The Confederate captain had been the one who had captured him, P.J. Johnson, and the Union soldier, J.B. Buckbee, many years later, wrote to him. In fact, they found each other. It was the Confederate officer who sent a letter to the Detroit Free Press saying, anybody heard of this guy Buckbee? And Buckbee responded and found him and wrote him a letter, and they reunited. And they commented on the kindnesses they had extended to each other in the midst of that period of time in which Buckbee had been captured by Johnson. He had been wounded. They both needed medical help and attention. They cared for each other. They then were separated, and they both survived the war, and they went looking back for each other. And the thing about the letter that is so compelling, and it was brought to us by PBS, and I'm grateful for that, is that it was crystal clear. They had the greatest of respect for each other. You could sense that the worst thing they could ever imagine was having gone to war, or that their children would ever go to war again against Americans. The people who lived through it still haunt us today in reminding us this is something we must never, ever do again. And I'm not afraid to have you preach, and I'm not afraid to preach standing right next to you. This is the dumbest idea. So when people are running around on social media and internet sites and thinking that by upping the rhetoric, they're going to up their clicks and their viewers and their followers and their subscribers and all that sort of stuff, what they need to do is open a book and read some history and take a look at what it's like to lose 3% of your population dead on your own streets and to lose your entire economic ability to function, to die starving, to die freezing, to watch people dying in prison camps. The Civil War is the worst form of war. And maybe what we need to recognize is that people could have stopped the Civil War. People could stop the next one. That's the point.
The conversations are just getting started. To get connected, check out 1850mainstreet.com. And if you want more, check out Your Morning Show and The Public Square. Your Morning Show is where you can hear Michael and David talking about the stories of the day every day. And you can learn more about what's really going on behind the scenes in public policy at The Public Square. You can listen to Your Morning Show and The Public Square on the iHeart mobile app and on radio stations across the country. Subscribe today so you don't miss a single conversation. We'll see you next time here at 1850 Main Street.